All right, hello, fellow Wonder Women. Those of you who are able to tune in live, hey. And those of you who may be watching this as an archive video, welcome. This is our inaugural Wonder Women Lean interview, and we have kicking all of this off our very own Nancy Beane, who is at the Westminster School in Atlanta, and also currently our NACAC President. And joining me on this interview is Jenny Byans, who is an independent educational consultant. So I'm going to have her introduce herself real quick. If you want to know a little bit about both of us, we did a pre-interview, so you can watch that, but we want to spend as much time as possible on the woman that we are featuring today. So Jenny, could you just introduce yourself real quick?
Sure, thanks, Nikki. Jenny Byans. I'm an independent consultant here in the wonderful Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. Been doing this for about 8 years, and my experience is all on the high school side as a college and career center director, and also as a private school counselor for students with learning differences.
So we are officially covering 3 time zones. And if I could have our featured speaker here today, Wonder Woman Nancy Beane, introduce herself and talk a little bit about her career path so all of us can get to know her. Nancy?
Well, good morning or good afternoon. I guess it's still morning everywhere. But anyway, good morning to everybody. My career path is sort of an interesting one. When I was at Agnes Scott, and I went to Agnes Scott College, got a Bachelor of Arts there in history, and then graduated from UNC Chapel Hill with a Master of Arts in Teaching of History, and then finally have a what's called an EDS in Social Studies from Georgia State University. And I was assigned to teach in Wilmington, North Carolina. I had decided in my student teaching at Agnes Scott, we didn't have a major there, but I had gotten elementary certification that I did not want to be an elementary school teacher. And so I went to Chapel Hill and was assigned to teach in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I arrived there in the fall of 1968, and they had just closed the black high school there in Wilmington for all students of color. And they had put those students in the 2 white high schools without changing the school name, the school song, the school colors, anything. And the first day they had a pep rally, and they had the students in the band up on the stage, and they had not integrated the band yet. I didn't think too much about that because maybe they hadn't had time, and they were waving the rebel flag and playing Dixie. And I was horrified, frankly. And so I went into the teacher's lounge afterwards thinking everybody thought just like I did. And I said, I just can't believe they did that. And a white woman, got right up in my face and said, that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it's going to be. I tell that story because I became pretty involved in the civil rights movement there in terms of trying to make sure that all my students were protected. And about a third of my students were students of color. And so we ended up with big racial riots there to the point that we had the National Guard in the city. And I don't know that any of you know the Wilmington 10, but if you'll Google the Wilmington 10, you'll find that those were 9 young men of color and 1 white woman who were accused of conspiring to burn and murder at Mike's Grocery. They were sentenced to prison. They were later pardoned, but they were not pardoned with innocence until 2014. And so I taught for 3 years in that high school, then left and went to Durham, North Carolina. And guess what? I couldn't get a job teaching high school history. So I went back into elementary school and taught 6th grade in an inner city school there, 35 kids, no planning period at all. Taught those kids every subject area. They ranged in reading ability from pre-kindergarten to 9th grade. And it was really difficult at first. My principal tried to have me fired the first day, but ultimately he decided I was okay. He had been told at age 62 he'd always had a great school, and students of all color. And then at the year before, they had integrated the school and put children there and teachers there, and it was a very difficult period for him. So most of the teachers left, and he got a new crop of us. I probably weighed 85 at the time, and he decided I wasn't big enough to do the job. So that's a long story. But in any event, he and I became very close before it was over with. And I wonder to this day, where are my students? Where's Edward, who was the angriest young man I've ever known in the 6th grade? Where is Willie, who was mentally challenged? Where are Cora and Medusa, who were incredibly brilliant? And I wonder, you know, what educational opportunities did they have? So then next I moved to Houston and taught in Aldine Independent School District. Still couldn't get a job teaching history. So I taught 5th grade for 3 years, then 1st grade for a year, thinking I needed to get into the administration. Left there and moved to North Carolina, stayed home with our daughter until she went to school, and then taught south of Atlanta in 2 public high schools. Westlake High School is still there, and that's the place that Cam Newton, if anybody knows that name, graduated. He wasn't thought of when I was there. He was long before he was born. But in any event, that's my story. So I taught 15 years in public schools and then have been at Westminster for 28 years and taught history here until 2 years ago when they decided that none of the college counselors would teach. Some of us may go back into the classroom, but I probably won't. And so I've taught a total of 43 years. I'm old. How did I end up in this field? In 1992, I was called into the principal's office, and he said, we need a new college counselor. Would you be interested in that? And I went, what? I don't know anything about college counseling. No. So I went home that night, talked to my husband, and the next day I came back and said, you know, I think I might be interested. He said, well, that's too bad. The headmaster has moved on. You didn't take advantage of it yesterday, and we're done. So for about 3 months, I had to go through the interview process, and they brought lots of people in, and ultimately I did get that job in the fall of '92. So that's how I ended up in college counseling. Leon Scott was my co-counselor. He had all the boys, I had all the girls. I had 100 girls. And that doesn't seem like much to those of you who are in public schools. So, you know, I have to say, I still don't know how you handle a load of 400 to 1,000 students. And this is why I think we all need to work together a lot more than maybe sometimes we do. And it's not a paternalistic kind of thing. It's a sharing. And so I think my background of having been in a public school for so long, while I was not a school counselor, I did do the IEP committee. And so the student who had different learning issues and so forth came before us all the time. So I think my background helped me a lot. But going back to Leon, Leon Scott was a saint. He was a mess, and in the South, that's a good thing, frankly. But he helped me all along the way, and he volunteered for us to handle, and people who, well, you may not remember this, but people who were in NACAC, he volunteered for us to head up the registration for the NACAC conference. We didn't even have, what do we call them? We didn't even have anything to give anybody when they paid the money to do it, a receipt. And people would say, could I have a receipt? And we'd go, we don't have one. So I'm sure we were not very impressive. At the end of the year, our assistant took care of most of it. At the end of the year, we said, this wasn't so bad. We might do it again. She said, you do and I'll quit. So that's how I got involved in NACAC. And then there were people, Therese Busher was the head of NACAC. And she asked me to come on board and be the person who would handle the newsletter. I'd never done anything like that before, but I did it. Westminster wasn't quite as cooperative as I would like for them to have been. They've been great. Westminster has supported me every step of the way. But in terms of putting out that newsletter, that was a bit of an issue. So Nikki Danos, who was at Loyola in New Orleans, helped. And the rest is history. And so I just haven't been able to quit. So that's a lot of blah, 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 but that's my background.
There's nothing blah, blah, blah about it. And I'm sure there are a lot of other bits and pieces that you're sort of glossing over. But I wanted to kick it over to Jenny and see what questions you have lined up.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Nancy, what, you mentioned that, people need to work together. And then, but you more specifically, you mentioned that Leon Scott fellow who was a co-worker, but he helped you through things. So in essence, he was a mentor. What do you think of when you can you define the word mentor for us? What that looks like?
Specifically referencing Leon.
Yeah.
He would come in my office probably 8 or 10 times a day and say, how are you coming on that letter? Or what are you doing? And I would basically say, Leon, get out. I could get this done faster if you weren't in here talking to me. And I tell that because I would go in his office probably 20 times a day. And I would say, look at this. Is this okay? What do you think? Never once did he tell me to get out. Never once was he impatient with me. He took me under his wing and he taught me everything I know, and he was the best. And I cannot pay enough tribute to him for the advice he gave me, for the support he gave me. And of course, Westminster was right in there supporting too, but he was the day-to-day support. There were others who did that. If anybody knew some of these people, Sam Moss, who's at Darlington, let me think who all, just so many people. Mimi Grossman certainly was one who was in Memphis. And then along the way, I have met tremendous numbers of mentors. And sometimes they've been older mentors, and sometimes they've been younger mentors. So people like you, Nikki Chun, and people like Brandy, and people like you, Jenny. So I think a mentor is somebody who will just be there for emotional support, be there for advice, be available. I'm always giving people my cell number and just saying, call if you need something. People on the college side, like Bill Starling was a huge mentor. Jack Blackburn was a huge mentor. Both of those men have since passed away. And I will tell you, when each one of them died, those were some of the hardest days I've ever faced, of trying to get beyond the fact that they were not going to be here anymore. If you're talking about a younger mentor, and I know I'm mentioning a lot of guys, and there have been a tremendous number of women too, but Myron Burney. Myron Burney was one of the biggest mentors for me I've had in a long time, and he unfortunately passed away too, untimely.
And what was your relationship with Myron? How did you know him?
Well, Myron was at that time at North Carolina State.
Okay.
In the admissions office, and he wanted to be president of I think he wanted to be president of a historically black college and university someday, but he definitely wanted to be a college president. And he had been, he had left NC State and was working in the UNC system, I think, and was down at Elizabeth City in a historically black college and university there, and had a traffic accident and passed away. The way I connected with him and called him such a mentor, my husband is a first-gen kid. His parents had 8th grade educations. None of the other kids went to college. None of the grandchildren went to college except our daughter and one other cousin. And finally, we had the great-grandchildren going. So our great nephew, Seth, said there's no reason to go to college. People cannot get a job if they go to college. And he was working in a machine shop in Greensboro, North Carolina. And so he applied to North Carolina State, and he said, they don't care anything about me. They never did get back to me. And so I quickly put out an email to Myron and said, Myron, can you please answer Seth back? Because he thinks there's no reason to get a college education. Myron sent him a wonderful email that said, Seth, I'm here for you. If you need me anytime, you just let me know during the college process. And the end of this story is that Seth started at Randolph Community College there in North Carolina. He finished there. He just finished his degree last spring from East Carolina, online in engineering. So we're talking about a new world now. But because he worked in that machine shop, he could do all of his lab type work for the mechanical engineering degree there. So I will be forever grateful to Myron. And he just did so much for so many people. And I think he will live on in our memory. There's a Myron Burney not scholarship, but award for SACAC. And I think all of us in SACAC just think the world of him, and would give anything if he were still here.
Yeah. Well, I think you've hit on a couple of important points to try to describe a mentor for folks, because I think people think that you need to be in physical proximity to the person. You're saying not necessary.
No.
And you said for a lot of these people that they also mentored a lot of other people. It wasn't just that they were mentoring you, for example. That's just kind of the spirit of their personality. And then also, they weren't direct you weren't directly reporting to those people like you might have been with the first fella.
Right.
You mentioned, yeah. So you also said there's older people and younger people that can mentor you. So I think some of us, as we're getting older, worry that there's not a lot of people older than us to be mentors. Then, hey, there's a lot of young people that can mentor us as well.
I love that idea that mentorship defies age. I think even for me, I'm flattered that you would count me among them. I know that I have so much I could learn from you, but I love that philosophy, and I think that would help all of us open up our own networks to really consider that that definition of mentorship. What I'd love to ask you about, Nancy, is what inspired you to find your way into the national leadership position that you're currently in as our NACAC president? How does that happen?
Well, it was an evolution. As I mentioned, I became involved in SACAC through doing registration, but then through Therese Busher asking me to be on their board. At that time, Publications was the chair. And so I was the Publications chair for 3 years. And so then gradually I just kept being involved. I presented at a lot of conferences. Leon was the kind, and he grew up in a different era, so to speak. Leon was the kind that would go to conferences, but he didn't go to all the sessions. He would meet people in the halls or have a drink with people or whatever in order to just have discussions. And I tended to do more with presentations at sessions, so I was always willing to present. I became more and more involved, and so I distinctly remember the day that Beckett Howarth and Richard Powell came to me and said, "We'd like you to be president-elect of SACAC," and I was like, "What?" And so it took me a little bit of time, but I did end up doing that, and so I was president of SACAC, and that gave me exposure more on the national level. Now, I had gone to all the conferences. I had started in 1992 at the LA NACAC conference. I've only missed one since then. And oh my goodness, it was the San Francisco conference, but our daughter was a freshman in college and having freshman parents weekend. So I certainly was not going to not be involved in that. And so other than that, I've gone to all the NACAC conferences. And so I presented at some of those. I presented at some other things. So it was all fun and a lot of work. But I kept having opportunities to be involved, and so I finished the SACAC presidency, I guess, in 2005, and in 2008, I had gotten those notes that many of you get, and we hope you will respond to those, saying we would like you to consider board service or committee service or something for NACAC. And so I did put myself up for the NACAC board in 2008 and was elected and served till 2011. And I think we had a new strategic plan, and I was so excited by some of what was in that plan, particularly for paying more attention to public school counselors and for paying attention to international concerns. I was on the board when we came up with the idea that we needed to have a commission that would look at international to see what needed to happen. And so I rotated off the board in 2011, continued to stay involved mainly through ACCESS. Then that's the Association of College Counselors and Independent Schools, and was on their board of trustees from 2012 to 2015. And then decided that I would put myself up for president-elect. And so that's pretty much how it happened. I've had tremendous opportunities, and I really think a lot of that's funny in some ways. Because if you go back, believe it or not, I know people don't believe this since I talk all the time. But if you go back to my high school years, I was not a kid that was in with the in crowd by any stretch of the imagination. I could not get elected even to the beta club in my high school. You had to, if you qualified, you had to be elected by the student body. I was up 3 times, never did get elected to that thing. Later was the advisor in high school for the junior beta club, which was insult to injury, but in any event. But I was a kid. I was in the band. I was in Girl Scouts. I was in Youth Fellowship. When I went to Agnes Scott, I will tell you that this shy kid, and I was really shy, And I think I was a linear thinker. I think I was not very mature intellectually or personally. And going to that women's college, and I will be forever grateful to Agnes Scott College, gave me a voice. And while I certainly don't think you have to do such a thing, I am a huge proponent of women's colleges and of men's colleges. There are only 3 men's colleges in the whole country. But I think they are absolutely ones that can help all of us to grow and be, find our voice. And you can do that at plenty of schools. You can find it in a big university. You may have to be a little more assertive. But anyway, so that was pretty much how that happened.
So I think that we've circulated some things in the group. I'm interested in following up on this, where women tend to be a little hesitant, reticent to put themselves out there, especially not only leadership positions, but applying for jobs. And so you mentioned that, you put the notes out, you put the feelers out, and you're always encouraging people to fill these positions. What advice would you have for especially women in this group who see those, and then the first thought they have is, I don't know that I'm qualified? What kind of advice do you have for those kinds of professionals?
Well, the first thing I would say is, before you publicly state that, as I did with my principal of the upper school in my high school here at Westminster, of saying, I don't know anything about college counseling, no, I'm not interested. Before you publicly state such a thing, I think you need to go back and take stock of it. Where do you want to be in your career? What are you doing? And I will just tell you, please, don't get discouraged. It's a different world in which we live. When I started college counseling, I could pretty much predict who was going to get in where if they had certain credentials. And it's not a crapshoot. It absolutely is not. It is a process that works, but it's not as easy in some ways. And I think all of us face a lot of challenges. We face challenges financially, because we're not going to make a lot of money in education. At least I don't. If anybody's figured out how to do that, let me know. We're not going to make a lot of money, but it's a career that is just so amazing. So I would say to people, don't let yourself get discouraged. Get involved if you can, particularly in your affiliates. We have 23 affiliates. Get involved in your affiliates. I have one friend who shall remain nameless right now, but she tried really hard, she said, for NACAC, and she didn't feel that she was getting anywhere with it. So she became more involved in Access for the independent school counselors. So there are all sorts of ways to get involved. They're community-based organizations. So if for some reason you're not feeling that leadership love, so to speak, in particular areas, then get in with something else that you can do. And I just think there's so many opportunities out there for us. So for God's sake, don't let yourself get discouraged. Please don't leave our profession. The torch is being passed from those of us who are older. I'm older than Jenny, but the torch is being passed from those of us who are older to those people who are younger. And we need people who are dedicated and committed. I've laughed and said that no one understands our, oh goodness, somebody has locked the door. And anyway, excuse me 1 minute. I've got to go unlock the door of the College Counseling Center. I'll be right back. I'm sorry.
Technical difficulties. She's in a Skype booth. For those of you who may not, I didn't know, Westminster apparently has a Skype booth. So that's where she's talking to us from. But as she was, I mean, I'm so like, if I thought I was inspired before to get involved, I feel like I can't do anything fast enough after today's conversation.
We're about 5 minutes away from the end of the session, so I just wanted to call your attention to that. So in case you've got other questions that might have appeared during our talk or want to wrap things up.
I haven't seen anything yet, but how about you, Jenny? Do you want to throw in one last question?
Well, I just want to, I love the name of the group. This group is the Wonder Women in Admissions. And I'm just curious as to, Nancy, where do Wonder Women get their power? I know we only got a couple of minutes left, but we're Wonder Women and we like to think we're powerful, but where does that power come from?
Well, I think it comes comes from within, but it also comes from support, and not just from women, but I think as professionals, people in admissions, people in college counseling understand each other more in terms of what we go through. Women understand each other, and I'm not trying to stereotype, but I think women understand some of the needs that we have in terms of, we often, not always, but often get divided in so many different ways. I have friends who are single mothers in this profession. I have friends who are married and have responsibilities outside of their school. So I think women overall need to support each other. I think we need to lean in, as we've talked about a lot. Brandy Smith has always said to me, lean in, Nancy Beane.
Yeah.
I think we need to lean in and do the kinds of things that we know we're capable of doing. So I appreciate every day this new social media that we have. I do think it's important for us to be responsible on that social media. But I appreciate the fact that we've got the Wonder Women, that we've got the Accept group, that we've got the College Counselors group, that there are a lot of opportunities for us to be involved. And so I think we need to continue to do that so that we will support each other. But I think that emotional support is huge. And if you're not able to go to conferences, your budget may not be such that you can do it. You may not be able to get out of your building. I think that's another issue for school counselors. I think it's just really important for you to do something. There are drive-in workshops. There are, we get together in Atlanta, I'll be honest, on Friday afternoons sometimes. We'll all just get together for drinks so that we can support each other. It's not just the women, it's the women and the men. But we understand what's going on in our profession. So I think where that power comes from is believing that we are A, smart, B, we have the tools, we have the resources to be able to lean in, and we need to do that. And if we do that, I think we can do anything that we set our minds to. And I tell my students that all the time. So
if I could throw in one last wrap-up kind of question, what's next for Nancy Beane?
Oh, mercy. Well, I plan on working. I haven't announced this to my school exactly, although I've told my boss, Steve Frappier is Director of College Counseling, and he has been enormously supportive in terms of the work we're doing. And so probably 3 more years for me here. What I would like to do when I finish is to do more pro bono type work, volunteer type work. If people don't think I'm too old, Missy Sanchez is doing a great job of that here in Atlanta. And so I would like to do that kind of work. I've been fascinated with the CBOs. I had the opportunity last year to go to New York State's ACAC, and they have a coming together conference before their main conference. And there were 200 people there, all from CBOs and some colleges and some college counselors and some school counselors, all of whom were working with and for our students, because we have tremendous number of students who, young, old, people who are in the military now who need to go back to school, people who are going back to school for other areas. Approximately 42% of students transfer at some point in college, either from a community college to a 4-year school or a 4-year school to a community college. It is amazing to me, and there's just so much work that needs to be done. So I'm not sure yet, but I would like some time to spend with my husband, who's been a saint throughout this whole career, and he has retired now. So probably traveling, but continuing to work for 3 more years and pouring myself into it. And I don't know if I can quit after 3 years or not, because I do love this work, love the students, and enjoy what I'm doing.
Well, it sounds like if there are any of our Wonder Women out there involved in our CBOs, you might want to buddy up to Nancy sooner than later. Or if anybody has any travel connections, maybe you can provide her with a gift on behalf of all of us. And we thank you, Nancy, not only for joining us today and sharing of your story, but also just being a role model and being a leader. And so I hope that everybody at least was able to come away from this with with something that will stick. I know I did. And thank you to Jenny for responding to my request in the first place. And it's wonderful to meet you, and for joining us on this. So we're going to stay true to the time here. Again, thank you, everyone. Wonder Women everywhere. This is, I don't know, I tried to think of something clever. This is Nikki Chun signing off and reminding you to let your cape fly free. Thank you, everyone, and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.